So good afternoon, everyone. I can't believe that the summer term is almost at its halfway point. So congratulations to everyone so far. I hope everyone has been able to gain a little clarity and ownership over their work. And most importantly, it's better understanding how their work is fitting into the overall mission of their host organizations. Um, and I promise you that the work you're doing it's meaningful, it's important, and it's valued. And just to everyone, welcome to the fourth of our summer alumni webinar series. And I'm very certain that our fellows are sick and tired of me just introducing myself. So really briefly, but again, just for our moderator and our panelists, an official hello. My name is Kendall Gray, the Changemaker Collaborative Program Assistant at the Unique Sustainability Institute. So I support our student-facing programming. A lot of my role is with the Sustainability Fellowship. I was a 2019 fellow, and I'm also a graduate of Unique's class of 2020. Last week, we were joined by moderator Jeff Cohn and panelists Tim Ryder, Kelly Flick, and Rebecca Owens for a discussion on public policy. And today, we're also joined by an excellent group of panelists, so thank you. And we're excited for you to hear, all of our fellows to hear their stories in working to improve the world. We have a smaller group of panelists today, which means we have plenty of time for question and answer. So throughout the webinar, feel free to type questions in the chat as they come to mind, and we'll answer them at the end. So don't be shy. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lisa Fernandez, who's going to introduce herself as well as our moderator.
Thanks, Kendall. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Fernandez. I am from the UNH Sustainability Institute, along with my coworkers and colleagues here today. I am the communication director for the Food Solutions New England Network, and some of you are already familiar with that network. It's a 6-state network that really unites the whole regional food system around democracy, racial equity, sustainability, and building trust across the whole region to achieve our shared goals. I'm really grateful and honored to be here to introduce our moderator for today's session, Adrienne Messe. And Adrienne is the Associate Director of Events and Solutions for the Organic Trade Association, membership-based business association for organic agriculture and products in North America. As some of you know, OTA is the leading voice for organic trade in the United States, representing over 9,500 organic businesses across all 50 states. And within her role, she manages OTA's event engagement, organic fraud prevention solutions program, Sustainable Food Trade Action Council, and recently organized an independent dialogue for the UN Food Systems Summit that's coming up later this year. Prior to OTA, she served as a liaison for Food Export USA Northeast, assisting US agriculture businesses with exporting their products abroad. In 2012, Adrienne earned a dual degree in international affairs and anthropology from the University of New Hampshire and served as a social innovation intern, assisting New England footwear manufacturing with its startup research. I'm so honored to have you with us, Adrienne. And with that, I will turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. What an exciting introduction. You just made me sound like a full-fledged adult, and I literally feel like it was yesterday that I was at UNH and starting this internship, and I was getting so excited about entering the real world. And I'm so excited to hear all of your questions and to be taking part in this today. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I guess just to kind of start out our topic in general before we turn it over and open up to some questions from our panelists. Sustainable agriculture and resilient food systems is a topic that I think about all the time. And the way I see it, we all eat food and we all need to keep eating food for a very, very long time. And so I think the most basic question when I start to think about sustainability in terms of food systems is, can our current agricultural system sustain? And it obviously sounds like a really basic question, but it's an important one to think about. Can our earth endure what we're doing to it through all aspects of our food system? Can our bodies endure what we're doing to them in everything that we consume on a daily basis? And if not, what are some what are some changes that we can make? What can we learn from decisions and policies in the past so that we can continue to grow and flourish for many, 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 many years to come as a globe? And we are all very, very interconnected, as we all know. So I think one of the most exciting parts is that sustainability is a huge buzzword in basically every industry right now. So there's no end in sight to, I think, opportunities to create change and to really pursue more sustainable food systems in all kinds of different day-to-day jobs, which is super exciting because not everybody likes to do the same thing every day. And we need everyone's support to try to make such colossal change in farming and in food industry. So in terms of sustainable agriculture, it's kind of hard to talk about agriculture without talking about soil very fundamentally. So I think in terms of my work with the organic industry, organic farming practices at their roots, if you will, are extremely sustainable by definition. So organic farming practices sequester carbon in the soil to help mitigate climate change. Obviously, climate change is something that is a hugely important aspect of sustainability overall. Organic farming practices also cultivate more nutrients in the soil so that the crops can have more nutrients and ultimately our bodies can absorb more of that nutrients. And it also uses farming practices like crop rotation to be able to actually, get rid of bugs and pests without directly spraying pesticides on everything that we're ingesting. So at a very, very basic level, investing in organic farming practices is something that pursues fundamentally a more sustainable food system. But there are so many different ways in terms of food distribution, in terms of innovations in product packaging, in terms of, actually supporting farm to table, big brands, caring more about that because consumers are buying it. So I just think, at a very fundamental level, agriculture at its core can be sustainable. And there's so many other ways to infiltrate food systems to create change across the entire supply chain. So I think that is a super exciting part about being involved in sustainable agriculture and the opportunities that are out there right now. More and more people are caring about what they're buying, where their money is going, what they're thinking about, what farm the ingredients came from. And that in turn makes businesses care about that more because that's where people are spending their money. So I think that is a huge opportunity and an exciting change that's happening all over the place in the food industry. And there's other innovative models that I'm super excited to hear more about today too. So issues like food waste and food access and food equity. I think we'll hear more about that from Sarah with her work with the community kitchen. And then there's also, if you're more on the sciencey side of things, there's research and development that has to happen in order for more investments to be made and for us to understand what farms need and what additional support is needed and who else needs to be involved. So from a research perspective, there's so much still to be done. And then also policies. A huge part of what Organic Trade Association does is protect and promote what something like an organic certification means. And Washington, D.C. seems kind of far off when we're in New England, thinking about all the farms in our backyard. And I think it's sometimes more tangible to think about farms and soil, but farmers should be writing that policy too. And it shouldn't just be people in suits in Washington writing that policy that ultimately in turn affects farms and affects the distribution and the food that we ultimately have access to. So food systems are extremely dynamic. There is no shortage of ways to get involved. And I think my one big takeaway also is patience. I think that's a big challenge for all of us, is that we have to have patience because these food systems were not created overnight. They're not going to change overnight. But each and every one of us in our daily lives and careers has a huge opportunity to create change towards more sustainable and resilient food systems. So with that, I will kind of turn it over to our panelists here to hear a little bit more about their work with food systems and pursuing more resilience and sustainable food systems. So we have two wonderful panelists here today, and I will start it off with Sarah. If you could tell us a little bit more about who you are, what your current professional role is, and how it relates to sustainable and resilient food systems.
Sure, thanks so much. And I'm so glad to see the interest that people are having in how sustainability and food systems tie together. So my name is Sarah Harpster, and I am the Hunger Solutions Advocacy Coordinator at the Community Kitchen, a role that was created this spring. Prior to that, for 8 years, I was the Gleaning Coordinator at the Community Kitchen, and it gave me a really deep understanding of the many dynamics around how our food system works at the limited food access end of the spectrum. So creating a gleaning program and hours in Cheshire County was created at the same time as 6 others across the state of New Hampshire. So we all we're this small network that got started together and has been on a learning path together. It was a great win-win-win, first of all, to be gleaning, capturing local produce that didn't have a market, because you have to overproduce and things happen, and not every cucumber and zucchini is going to be sold off of the farm stand. But that's the freshest, most nutritious and delicious food that people who have limited food access rarely get to put on their tables. So just tying together those pieces and reducing food waste and improving the quality of charitable food supply was really great, a great place to start. But it was also a place over the years where many questions came up, like it's so seasonal, it's New England. What do you do, when you're oversupplied with free produce that you can't even hand it out to everyone? And in the other end of the year, you have hardly anything to offer. So it doesn't seem to really address food access, that being one. And, there's this really troubling dynamic in a charitable situation where there are the givers and the receivers, and people who are receiving food, there's a social attitude like you should just be happy with what you get, and the systems by which everything is happening are based on what works for the professionals and the volunteers. Maybe at the end of the line, considerations are made as far as the people who are accessing food through that system. And why is there even a separate system for a designated group of people in our society? How did we get to accepting that kind of dynamic? So those questions really rose to the top for me as issues that I was more interested in focusing on, and not to let go of gleaning. We have a new gleaning coordinator that we're very excited about, and he comes from a farming background. And more of us are putting our heads together around these questions, but there are organizations around the country like Closing the Hunger Gap that are making these points. The charitable food system can sometimes get in the way of really bringing about empowerment and equity and sustainability in the food system. So we're trying to figure out how to tackle those questions.
Not easy questions to tackle, certainly, but thank you for doing it, Sarah. That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit more about what you studied, what your degree was in, and kind of what your path was in getting to this super cool career?
Actually, it's kind of a wandering path. My undergrad was in Anthropology and Latin American Studies from Colgate University. I graduated in '96 and went overseas to the Dominican Republic for a few years to do this and that, volunteer, and then I worked in a non-governmental organization. And then I came back to the States, and just with life circumstances, ended up deciding to attend seminary. And I was in Ohio, Methodist Theological School in Ohio. And I did a dual degree there in divinity and theological studies. And that was when I really looked at the crisis of our time is around, is tied into the environment and how we are stewarding, you know, the language. Then I talked a lot about stewarding and being in relationship with each other and the environment that we live in, and how it could lead, you know, to such disasters. So I ended up deciding that I really wanted to be maybe in the activist role, and I came to Antioch University, New England, and did their Master of Science in environmental advocacy and organizing. So it was in that space that I met Krista Kohler-Daniels and started, I did, you know, a internship with Clean Air, Cool Planet. And then they had a fellows program as I was graduating in 2008. So that was how I got into the fellowship program, and I did that and actually continued to work at Clean Air, Cool Planet for a couple of years on municipal energy conservation.
Super cool.
Yeah. And then I was committed to this area. So more, you know, the funding dried up for that position. So I stayed in the area and worked in healthcare for a little bit, doing some advocacy, and then came to the community kitchen in 2013.
I love to hear that you studied anthropology also, because I also studied anthropology, and I didn't know, I wasn't initially interested in food systems. I was interested in international trade and like international business, kind of free trade agreements and things like that. But then once I started to learn more about food systems, I was like, wow, there's so much that connects us. There's so much that is different across cultures, or different challenges that different parts of the world have. So I think it's super cool to hear that you studied anthropology also, and then got into food systems.
It makes sense in the end,
right?
All of it ties together now.
Food. We all eat food. We got to keep eating food.
There's culture around that.
Yes. I'll turn it over to you, Sabrina, for some similar questions, to hear a little bit more about your role, what your current position is, and how it contributes to resilient food systems.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be part of the conversation today. My name is Sabrina Karen, and I'm a senior impact analyst at Root Capital. We're based in the Cambridge office, and obviously remote for the time being. And then Root Capital, more broadly in our work, is an NGO and a nonprofit that works primarily with small to medium-sized agricultural businesses through both a lending and a capacity building program throughout Central America, South America, parts of East and West Africa, as well as Indonesia. And we mainly work in the coffee sector, but we also work with agricultural businesses and other tree crops such as cacao and macadamia. And then we're involved in a few staple grains such as maize, rice, and sorghum in sub-Saharan Africa specifically. And on the lending side, which is where a lot of my work falls, we primarily are investing in businesses that we consider in the missing middle of finance. So they're often too small to qualify for microfinance loans, and too large to qualify from commercial or government loans as well. And we provide access to capital. And then on our advisory side, we also provide capacity building around a number of different themes that are interwoven throughout our work, from financial advisory to climate advisory, agronomic assistance, as well as we have a strategic theme around women in agriculture, women inclusion in agriculture as well. And I've been with Root for about 2 years now, and my role sits on what we call the impact team, which is primarily the monitoring and evaluation side or arm of the organization. And I work closely with our monitoring system. So that is primarily our social and environmental due diligence. So for every loan we make, there's a screening process, both to ensure that the business is aligned with our mission, as far as negative practices go. And then also we collect a lot of data on the positive impact that these businesses, which are often cooperatives and aggregators of agricultural goods, the impact that they have on their communities and the environment. And then on the evaluation side, we do conduct deep dive impact evaluations, which are multi-year studies with more rigorous statistical analysis about the impact of our lending and our programs on prices paid to farmers or climate smart agricultural practices that are adopted. And I work on evaluations that are mainly to do with the agronomic and climate advisory work that we do. And then within that, within our impact team, we have strategic impact pathways, such as women in agriculture and youth inclusion. And then one of our newer ones is climate resilience. So at the end of last year, we launched our 5-year strategic plan around building the climate resilience of the businesses that we work with in anticipation of the currently occurring and future climate crisis. And so I work very closely with that initiative, and we're super excited to have our second UNH Sustainability Institute fellow working alongside us with that initiative as well, who is Flum Hardy, who I don't think could attend the panel today, but has been working with us this summer.
Awesome. Super interesting work, Sabrina. I love that. And can you talk a little more about what you studied and how you got into all this?
Sure. Yes, I studied. So for my undergrad, I had a double major in international political economy and Spanish language and literature from Fordham University, and graduated in 2013 and moved shortly after to Northern Argentina to work with a small group called the Foundation for Sustainable Development that was focused on the SDGs more broadly and connecting. I worked as a program coordinator helping connect students to organizations in this community that were working with a number of the SDGs. And in that time, just was noticing how I was continually drawn to all of the agricultural organizations that we worked with, and had always felt connected to land and gardening and the plant world. And after finishing my contract with that organization, decided to dive into the farming world and spent some time WWOOFing, which the network of organic farming, worldwide organic, or I don't even know what the acronym stands for anymore, if it's still operating, but staying and learning on different farms in the area. And was connected with a farm in southern Nicaragua, where I moved to and ended up working as their program manager for 3 years. And they were an education center focused on agroecological design and permaculture systems around food security and climate resilience in the area and the island in which they worked. Got really even more curious about the plant world and soil and agricultural systems, and decided to pursue a master's at Tufts University at the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy, specifically their agricultural, food, and the environment program. And so moved back to the US after 4 years internationally and completed that program. And in the summer between was a UNH Sustainability Institute fellow with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute in Portland. And then after graduating, started my work with Root Capital. And so kind of just continued to build on loving the agricultural and the food world. And yeah, Root Capital has been a really interesting bridge between, I think the international hands-on farming work and the type of work that their programs are focused on.
Absolutely, yeah. I love it. Also sounds like both of you definitely, speaking of anthropology, do kind of take a boots on the ground approach to things. It sounds like you both have spent a lot of time in the field, on farms, in working with local communities, and probably hearing what their local challenges are and then trying to respond to that. So in light of that and kind of your approach, this kind of same question for both of you, I guess, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you first. But what if you could identify maybe one of the biggest challenges that you have that you face in doing your job? What would it be?
Well, I think it does kind of come down to culture and sort of this divide that our culture has created, a perception of divides or many divides. Right now, what it feels like is sort of the professional class or the volunteers, the helpers, and I'll name, usually white people who are coming into, and our community here is mostly white altogether. So people on the other side of the divide are less often here, people of color, but there's just a historic roots to this divide between those who own the capital, who own the prosperity, and then give it out of largesse. And there's just a whole set of behaviors that we have around it, and perception and guilt and sense of empowerment. So with my goal of empowering people and handing power over to people who are used to being on the other side of that divide, it's like we have to sensitively navigate that for all of the people who are supporting this work as professionals and volunteers and people who want to give back to the community, and also, and then meeting people whose voices aren't heard, and who, if they come and say, you want to invite people who receive food into the board of directors, for example, there's a whole set of rituals and activities and a culture and a way of doing things that isn't familiar, and that automatically puts people on the short footing. So that's something that we're just really trying to understand and make sure that we change it, and that everyone feels like their voice is as strong as anybody's voice, and especially when they have a voice of experience out of lack of access to the food that they want. There is this movement of food sovereignty, and it's also an opportunity to think about the resources and in whose hands are the resources to grow our food. So it's an opportunity to think about really reparations and letting go of our control of the food system, so that everybody is, somehow on equal bearings. But how do you express that in the context of a rural New Hampshire food pantry and hot meals organization? So it's trying to figure that out. Like I said, this is a new program, and we have a group of folks that are kind of figuring out our first year together. And so when I talk about we're having these conversations, we're literally like in these conversations right now. And that to me is one of the challenges that I really want to get right, and get to work on it as soon as possible.
Great answer. It's definitely a challenge, but that was really, really well put. It certainly shouldn't be a privilege to have access to healthy food. It should just be something that everybody has access to. And unfortunately, that isn't the case. But I think it does take a multifaceted approach, and a different approach in rural Keene, New Hampshire, as opposed to Boston or a bigger city or a different part of the world. So super, super interesting to hear that challenge, and also the ways you're overcoming it. So Sabrina, same question to you. In your world travels and your observations, is there, if you could pin it down to one of your biggest challenges in achieving your goals, in terms of your organization achieving their goals, what would that be?
Sure. And yeah, I think hard to pin in one succinct way, but I would say just the impact of the climate crisis is not far off in the future, in the 2030s and 2050s, but it's definitely something that's very severely impacting many of the communities in which we work and the communities in which I farmed prior to going to grad school. every season right now, and it's extremely detrimental. And I think there was a big push for root capital to figure out how to strategically interweave this theme and this type of support throughout our organizational objectives. And I think we talk a lot about adaptation and the farmer demand for adaptation, and I think the cost barriers are just a huge barrier there for implementing what we know might be strong adaptive and mitigating practices. And it's really not that farmers aren't incentivized because they are experiencing these climatic shocks and these harvest losses from season to season, but that there's just a big financial gap in international investment in that space, even though there is a growing interest. And I think within the larger carbon mitigation and sequestration conversations, there is a burgeoning interest in carbon finance and unlocking carbon payments and carbon credits for farmers who are very much doing this work on the front lines, and we know could have a very large contribution to this global challenge more broadly outside of the immediate effects. And I think there a big challenge we see is there's almost like a lag between the science and the data and then the international consensus around the criteria and measurement that is clashing with a growing demand from investors and companies and businesses in the industry to be putting their money towards this. So there's a lot of big conversations around how is that carbon capital unlocked for farmers? What does it look like? How is it standardized? And a lot of that is a data barrier and waiting for satellites to be able to capture above ground carbon that's stored in above ground biomass. And I think that's a bigger challenge that the space we're in seems to be grappling with as well.
Climate change is an issue. It's definitely an issue and a challenge. And it's good in some ways that it kind of, again, like sustainability is unfortunately more of a buzzword now too, but I think to the point of all of us, there are so many careers that are getting at that, and there are so many businesses that now have to invest in their impact on climate change or not. So it's a decision that so many businesses are making, and I think it's an exciting time to be looking at jobs and to be thinking about a career path, because there are just so many different ways to approach it. This huge, colossal challenge that we face in our future and in all of our careers. So before we turn it over to some questions, do both of you have some parting words of advice overall? One thing that I think about in terms of my own career is pursuing solutions. It's something that I think I heard a lot from some of my first bosses, where it's really easy to get wrapped up in these huge, colossal challenges that we are all going to face for the rest of our lifetimes. It's anxiety inducing. It's how on earth do I have an impact? How am I going to, how are we going to address this kind of a thing? But I think my piece of advice to anybody would be to really stay solution oriented and to focus on long-term goals. Because that's really all we can do, is really try to nail it down to something that's going to make an impact and focus on the long-term goals while getting there. So do you have any words of advice or some advice to share? And we'll start with you, Sarah.
I guess I would say really get to know yourself, know your strengths and what you bring to the table, and where you feel your passion and interest strongest, and then know that you're going to build a team around you. And that team may be within your organization, it may be across the community, it might be across the world, and lean on your team. Don't try to be a hero, don't try to get it all done or be the one who has necessarily, and sometimes you're going to be the brilliant one, but you don't have to be the one who has all the best ideas. You'll feel much more connected and enjoy your work and feel successful in it when you share with others.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. And what about you, Sabrina?
Yeah, I think in a similar vein to what both of you have mentioned, there's obviously a lot happening in this space, and I think it can feel overwhelming. And I think I second Sarah in just really following the tools that you've built and the skills that you've built, as well as what really is what is passionate and most exciting for you to work towards. And I think I've appreciated as my career has narrowed, which maybe isn't the best approach, but I think as I've continued to follow an area that excited me, it's helped like boost my confidence in like there is direct impact and application. And I think that has been helpful in thinking through the larger ag and food system work, and even larger sustainability work and opportunities that exist out there. And then I think, yeah, just continuing to the point of building teams, continuing to make and maintain connections, both in what immediately interests you, but also branching out. And I think that's been a huge perk of when I did this fellowship, and also staying connected as an alumni. Is it's just always, it's again easy to be in our narrow space of interest, but there's always learning to be had in connecting with other professionals and folks in other spaces around us. And it's been really interesting through the UNH cohort model, I think, to see how at the beginning of the summer, one could be like, oh, these are loosely related projects and I see some overlap, but kind of thinking through the intricacies of it. And I think by the end of the summer, it's really interesting how much commonality there is between a lot of our work, even when it can seem separate on paper.
Totally, couldn't agree more. And I love grocery shopping now. Like being involved in the food industry, I take so much longer at the grocery store. I'm like, what is this fun product? What are they doing here? So I just think there's so many really cool, tangible ways to be involved in food systems, and then it all just starts to be relevant to your everyday, which I have found really satisfying and interesting. So thanks. So exciting learning from both of you and all of your work. Let's open it up to some questions. Let me see here.
We have one from Alex. I can go ahead and read that, Adrienne, if you'd like.
Is it in the chat here? Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I see it. Thanks, Kendall. So we have a question from Alexandra Ramey. As we all know, sustainability is a super broad field that requires systems thinking. But as Adrienne mentioned, that can be overwhelming. It feels like you can start to fix a problem like food sustainability, and you also have to think about poverty, equity, nutrition, ecological health, food and environment literacy, the list goes on. How do you balance keeping a systems perspective while focusing on your organization's distinct mission and role? That's a great question.
I'll jump in. So for me, what's easy about that is that the same things affect all of these either positively or negatively. If you're working on equity, you're working on sustainability. If you're working on the kinds of agriculture and investing in the kinds of agriculture that are going to be sustainable over time, those are the kinds that build community and opportunity for more people. So, so for me, I am a systems thinker, and I've learned over time. I think when I was younger, I was like, I want to do it all, you know, and I've learned over time that you personally can't do it all, but to work on this piece and have an eye to those other pieces is actually a way to affect positive change. And then the last thing I would say about that is being involved in Food Solutions New England has been incredibly helpful for me to gain that perspective and to be able to manage, feel like I'm working on both of those things, and other networks like New Hampshire Food Alliance and things like that.
Sabrina, you want to chime in too?
Sure. Yes, I would say I think the interconnectedness, similar to what Sarah mentioned, of all of these factors is always present. So when we're talking about, adaptation strategies that have ecological benefits, we're also analyzing the economic cost and or benefit. And many of these outcomes also have a very strong human health and food security benefit as well. And so I think similarly keeping an eye towards the system thinking lens while designing programs and initiatives has been crucial in my work, and then also I think within Root Capital's work more broadly. And on the network side as well, Root Capital, a huge part of their mission and work over the last 20 years is field building. And so we are a part of a number of networks as well, and there's a lot of shared learning. And I think that we are operating in a space that's very much thinking through the systems thinking for both the larger impact investing community as well as the climate science and climate adaptation community. And so are continually grounded and inspired by some of these other networks to continually thinking about our work and our organization as part of this larger system as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Sabrina. So we have got a question from Natalie about Big Ag. Got to come up. So she has a question about the Organic Trade Association's role with this. So Natalie's question is, a lot of people are concerned about the trend of greenwashing in organic agriculture, the idea that Big Ag has taken over the certification movement. How does the Organic Trade Association deal with that? How does Organic Trade Association grapple with the conflicts between the needs of small farmers and the needs for organic agriculture? There is clearly a lot of overlap and a lot of mutual benefit and also challenges. So absolutely, that's an awesome question, Natalie. Organic agriculture can scale up. So big agriculture, I think it just takes one Netflix documentary to send everyone to become a vegan. But big ag in terms of conventional agriculture is destroying the earth, really. And so, and policies that are written in Washington often subsidize those big ag businesses. If similar subsidies were given to organic farms, it does have the ability to scale up, and it has the ability to scale up and grow fundamentally much more than conventional agriculture does, because you're cultivating sustainable practices deep in the roots and in the soil so that we can continue to farm on the land forever. And to the point about, grappling between big ag and these policies that are written in Washington, and then really hearing and advocating for the voice of the farmers. There's so much advocacy that happens like that in Washington too. So part of what a huge part of what Organic Trade Association does is bring farmers to Washington. It's important for people to have dirt on their fingers and jeans and boots on in those Hill offices, meeting with policymakers so that they can advocate for the science that they know is true, and it can continue to be invested in. So it definitely takes constant defending and constant advocacy for those policies to be written and for it to scale up, but it absolutely has the potential to if it's able to be supported in that way. And so a huge part of what any trade association does is soliciting that firsthand feedback from our members, of which are all the organic businesses certified to the USDA organic certification. And then, and additionally, there's a lot that just goes into what that circle means on a product, what ingredients are allowed and not allowed. And that's actually a meeting that happens twice a year. The National Organic Standards Board meets twice a year to redo that list of what's allowed and what farming practices are working and not. So it's something it's constantly needed for farmers to really be a part of that conversation. And that's something that we help to bring that voice to Washington and incorporate it in organic policy. Organic can scale up. It doesn't have to just be big conventional ag farms. And I've been talking a lot about soil. All of this applies to animal welfare as well. Organic practices support animal welfare, and a lot of those kind of buzz documentaries that people see and associate with agriculture, it doesn't have to be that, and it's unfortunate that it is. So let's see, we've got a question here. How has the rural character of New Hampshire, New England helped or hindered your work at the community kitchen? That's a question from Ariana. For you, Sarah.
Okay, well, it is kind of nice that there's food being grown around our area. So if the idea is to get, more fresh off the farm food into people's baskets in the course of a day, it's perhaps more easily done here, although I haven't compared my notes with Boston area gleaners to see how well they do with that. But we have a number of wonderful farms. On the other hand, we have many challenges for people who are experiencing poverty around here, where housing prices are high, transportation costs are high. Sometimes people don't have the transportation that would get them even to come and be able to pick up food during the times that food pantries are open. So we are actually in the process of finishing a feasibility study and developing a mobile pantry program to really try to connect people not only with food, but also information and, again, that empowerment. Can we bring the conversation to them and have their voice involved? And there's just a lot of isolation. So that's the other side of that coin. And I think that, there are people living surrounded by farms that are making beautiful produce, and even some producers making amazing value-added products and cheeses and things like that. And they're just not accessible to the neighbors. And they're going even into cities. And that's where that wonderful food can receive the price point that it deserves to have. So there's kind of that economics of it as well, where some people are left out as eaters, even though it's coming from their community.
Yeah, absolutely. Food deserts, not only in cities, but in everyone's backyard, in a lot of areas, different challenges. A question for you, Sabrina. As an international nonprofit based in the US and working in developing nations, how do you address the historical oppression and power dynamics of root capitals of root capital, and how does root capital develop partnerships in other countries?
Sure, and that's a great question. I think a learning journey that is still in progress and probably always present. And we've definitely, as an organization, spent a lot of time talking through and thinking through that this year, and we're able to partake in a number of kind of consortiums and learning journeys with other international organizations to talk about what it's like to operate in this space and what it means and how it impacts our work and the way that we work, but more broadly to the model that we have and how we operate. So we have an office in Cambridge with probably 25 to 30 folks at any given time, but the vast majority of our teams are located in our field offices, and they're not expats from the US or Cambridge that are living and working in our field offices. The rest of Root Capital employees are actually from the cities and the communities in which we work and make investments. And so Cambridge, though the office site of probably a lot of our taxes and accounting and donation and fundraising center, is the smallest office by far. And I think also through the model in which we work, though I'm very invested in our climate resilience and ag program, it's very much from a data and analytical side of the organization. And so I'm not calling farmers from my home office in Somerville to talk about how farming practices should be adapted and the like, but the co-ops that we invest in are really these agents of change that are working directly with their farmers and the communities in which they work, and have very long-standing relationships with them, and are utilizing our support and our network to kind of leverage the type of agronomic assistance and internal credit system programs that they can provide to the farmers that they work with. And then we have longstanding relationships with many of these clients due to the field offices and the spaces in which our lending and advisory team have worked prior to joining Root Capital. And so we've been in this work in many of the regions we work in for 20 years now. And so for forming new partnerships, it's often through word of mouth or through other new cooperatives forming or branching off from other co-ops we've worked with. And we reach a handful of new clients every year. But by and large, the clients that we work with are clients that we've worked with for over 10 years in many cases. So that's what I would say is a quick answer there. But
yeah, definitely important across the board, it sounds like, to build relationships and really work together on approaches. We have another question here from Kathy. Sarah mentioned using produce that isn't sold at the farm stand. A big problem in the US is people thinking produce is bad simply because it doesn't look perfect. Are there any initiatives that you have seen or worked on that target changing produce misconceptions?
I know there's actually a lot of that sort of thing out there. And when I was first doing gleaning, there's some good documentaries out there. There's a movement that I think is probably stronger in Europe. I know in France, there's a law that you can't throw out produce, and there's Kindle mentioning Misfits Market. I've had Misfits Market stuff shared with me. It's great. It's good food. So I think that our culture does have to think about food differently, and for all of us to be excited about all of the food. And I'm also interested in food processing, at that smaller local scale. So how do we make sure that it all gets captured and saved for the other seasons? And then how do we all kind of participate in this food system on equal footing with each other? Let's not have a separate line for people who have lower incomes, but all of us be excited about getting our local food, getting it into the system, and having the same kinds of access. That's why I love programs like Granite State Market Match or Double Up Veggie Bucks, the kind of thing where I wouldn't know that the person next to me has some kind of subsidy to get their food at the farmer's market. So
I guess I have a kind of a follow-up question to that too, Sarah. In terms of food waste, I think there's a lot of programs in like big grocery store chains or whatever, like Hannaford's donated however much to their local food bank. Do you have any feedback or just observations around how to address food waste from that level? Because I think there's obviously so much scrambling that goes on probably at your level of it, where it's just so much of this food and you're able to reallocate it, which is amazing. And how do we stop the initial food waste from happening? Well,
now you're getting into like, I could go on for a very long time, and we're getting to the end, but the charitable food system really is kind of a release valve for the big food system. So we have, through the food banking system and Feeding America, we have lots and lots of agricultural product, and through USDA, lots and lots of agricultural product coming to the needy in society, to get that product off the shelves and stabilize prices and to continue to be able to and then you get a tax write-off, of course, when you donate to the charitable food system, which means that at the local level, I can go and glean. When I was at the gleaning coordinator, I could go and glean some local cucumbers that that just came out of the field that a local farmer, doesn't need for their market. And I bring it into the kitchen and I encounter, a huge stack of cucumbers in plastic sleeves that came through the other ends of the charitable food system, whether it's out of the grocery stores or through the food banking system. So so we have to think about it, get at a higher level and talk about our food system not as a profit center and an opportunity for people to be making big bucks by reducing their costs and getting the most dollar out of their product as they can, and rather realize that this is all of our life support system. And how do we control it equitably and everybody make a living off of it who's engaged in it, especially the workers. And all of these problems kind of push on each other and really are related to each other.
Yep, absolutely. I think we're almost at time here, but I have one more question for Sabrina too, from me. And it's a question that I kind of get a lot too, so I'm interested in your perspective on it. In terms of all this amazing work that all of us are doing that's contributing towards sustainable food systems, but there's a whole separate aspect of it when you're also working internationally. It's a question that we get a lot too. You're promoting sustainability, but you're flying products all around the world every single day. How is that sustainable? So in your work, how is that a question that you grapple with?
Yeah, that's a great, that is a great question, and especially since many of the crops we work in our export crops, so they are traveling across the world. I think that, yeah, I mean, we're very focused on such a specific sector within the supply chain on the business and aggregator level, and so I think we are looking at our footprint through that lens, but then obviously staying attuned to what buyers and people like Starbucks and Nestle and the like are doing to track their supply chains on one hand, but also to look at the sustainability implications of that. And I think that more and more actors throughout the supply chain are doing that work and making those commitments. I mean, I think just within the last few years, there's been bigger commitments from actors like Starbucks, Nestle, Keurig, Dr. Pepper, about the mitigation objectives that they want to have within their supply chain. And so, though these goods are largely export and flying internationally, I do think there is a lot of opportunity because of the types of crops that they are, for them to have a sequestering potential as well. And I think that's one of the spaces that there's an investment across the sector to kind of figure out what that looks like. And again, that work would be ultimately on the farm level, but it's a way that I think people involved in the supply chain are thinking about it. Yeah, and I don't know if we're gonna get folks to stop drinking coffee any day soon, and are we growing it in our backyards.
Yeah.
So it will continue to move around in that way for the time being.
Cool. Yeah, it's definitely always important to stay focused on the positive aspects of, I think, everything that we're doing, and just focus on that and the overall net impact. So thanks for that. So it looks like we're almost at time. We're at time, 2:01. We're over time. I've learned so much from you today. Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate hearing from you, Sabrina and Sarah, and hearing all the questions from you wonderful fellows. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here, and good luck to all of you fellows. You're all going to make an incredible difference in this summer and the future as well.